This week's Parsha is Parshas Ki Seitza2. Parshas Ki Seitza2, towards the beginning, discusses the laws of a lost object. If a person finds a lost object in the street, knows who the owner is, of course there is no doubt that there is a biblical obligation for the person to return that object to its rightful owner. Now, if a person does not know who the owner is, depending on the nature of the object, he may have to sell it because it will get rotten, let's say a banana. If a person finds an object like an animal that requires maintenance, he may have to maintain that animal. And he also may have to go to Yerushalayim to make a public announcement about that item so that the owner may come forward. Now, all of these laws are dependent on one significant feature. This is all only if the owner does not despair from ever finding his object again, or if we have indications that even though we don't know definitively that the owner has despaired, we could assume that he has. If he has despaired, or we could assume that he has despaired, then the halacha is, the Jewish law is, that a person may keep it and not return to its owner, no matter what. Now, this does not mean that is it a good thing to return it. This is talking about the letter of the law. The letter of the law is that you are now allowed to use this object forever and ever. And the previous owner has lost all rights to this object once he has despaired from ever finding it again. Now, this is interesting and surprising because we assume that a person who uses an object, who has bought that object, now is the owner of that object forever and ever until he sells it, or until he gives it as a present. But once an owner, always an owner. How is it that the Torah decides that once a person despairs from using an object, he no longer is related to that object to prevent another from taking possession of that object? The answer is that we always assume that whatever we view according to society as proper ethics is what we should do in any type of circumstance. And therefore we say that once an owner owes an owner, it's the wrong thing. You're stealing if you're taking this object, even after the owner has despaired. And that's because we view possessions, objects that we have, as being an extension of ourselves. We view our mammon, our monetary possessions, as extensions of ourselves. And as we always own ourselves, we own the objects that are under our ownership. But that's not the way the Torah views it. Possessions are merely things that have come into your usage continuously. And because you have this continuous usage, you can prevent others from using that object. It's not that your name is now engraved on that object, so to say. It's that you are the present user of this object, and for someone else to use the object and take it away from your usage is within your rights to prevent him from doing that. And once he despairs from ever using that object again, he is no longer the user of that object. His control over that object has now been lost. And that's why you are allowed to take that object and keep it and use it. And this just shows us that our conception of our property, what we own, is totally out of whack according to Torah. It's not an extension of ourselves. We view our possessions, what we own, as so intrinsic to our identity that we assume that our ownership could never be revoked without our permission. But that's not true. That's not the way the Torah views it. Towards the end of the Parsha, the Torah discusses the war with Amalek. Amalek attacked the Jewish people in the desert, and the Jewish people were tired, exhausted, and the Amalekim, the nation of Amalek, were totally unprovoked. They decided to attack the Jewish people just because what the Jewish people stand for was against who they were. Because of that, the Torah designates the nation of Amalek as the arch enemy of the Jewish people, and forever and ever we have an obligation to obliterate their memory from the world. The question is like this. Right before the paragraph that discusses the war with Amalek, the Torah discusses the prohibition against measures and weights being incorrect. If a person sells produce and he has to weigh the produce and his weights that he uses are off, and because of that he overcharges customers, that is a biblical prohibition of the Torah. A person is supposed to be very careful to make sure and constantly be vigilant with his weights to make sure that they're correctly weighed. Now, Rashi says that this prohibition, transgressing this prohibition, is the reason why Amalek, the nation of Amalek, the power that they represent, the reason why they have control over the Jewish people, why they have the power to attack us continuously throughout the generations. And he says that these two, the reason why they're together, the war with Amalek and the prohibition against having incorrect weights and measures, is because they are integrally connected. Transgressing the prohibition of one will cause the war with Amalek. Now the question is like this. Of course we understand that a person should not cheat his customers, but what is the connection to the arch enemy of the Jewish people? What characteristic that Amalek shared by a person who transgresses the prohibition against incorrect weights and measures? Have a good Shabbos.